I want to go over today some of the evidence base in and around weight loss, and in particular the diets that have been commonly used for weight loss. And look, I set my stall out here. Over the years, patients will come to me asking for help with weight loss. And the difficulty is we have lots and lots and lots of low quality evidence for individual diets. So whether that's intermittent fasting, whether that's paleo, whether that's a DASH diet, and even the Mediterranean diet, it's hard to pin down the real evidence base for following it because there's lots of what's called heterogeneity. And that is where the individuals are very different, the approaches are very different. One person's interpretation of a diet is somewhat different to the others. So we've not been able to have really good quality evidence. But when we take something called a meta-analysis, especially a meta-analysis of random controlled trials, we get better evidence regarding the bigger picture. And that's where researchers are actually looking at vast numbers and seeing if we get strength of evidence by that bigger number of lots of studies. So there was this publication in 2020 by Denou et al., which is Denou and colleagues, and it was published in a journal called Advances in Nutrition. It was named Effects of Popular Diets on Anthropometric and Cardiometabolic Parameters. So really it's looking at your wellness, like how does this impact in things like your lipid levels, your blood pressure, your weight. So the things that we're looking at specifically were body weight, BMI, lipids, glucose, blood sugar level, insulin, your HbA1c, which is your average blood sugar over the preceding 6-8 weeks, and blood pressure. So it was done through what's called an umbrella review. So they looked at 495 meta-analyses from 80 papers, and then they focused down onto the random controlled trials. So the diets that came up in these trials were low carb, high protein, low fat, Mediterranean, the DASH diet, vegetarian or vegan, the Nordic diet, paleo, the low GI diet, intermittent fasting, and something called a portfolio diet, which was plants, fiber, soy, nuts. So the strongest evidence out there, and the strongest evidence based on the amount of data that we're able to collect and show an impact, was with the Mediterranean diet. It did consistently improve weight, BMI, blood pressure, cholesterol, and glucose. And there was absolutely no evidence of harm, and that's really important. The evidence graded was more suggestive and not really convincing, again, due to that heterogeneity that we talked about at the start. Now, the DASH diet probably comes in about second place, and there was benefit for weight loss and blood pressure with the DASH diet. Again, it was weak, inconsistent, and not always that impressive. Mostly it was in and around the lipids and the glycemic measures there. So if we look at moderate or inconsistent evidence, low-carb diets, you got weight loss, but tended to be in the short term. Lipids, it was actually a bit of a mixed picture with lipids, because when you went low-carb, you often went high animal meat. So in some of those cases, we had an increase in LDL. Blood sugar, interestingly, insulin goes down with low carb, and that's a lot of what we've talked about in terms of how your body processes carbohydrates. You have carbohydrates, it spikes your blood sugar, it spikes your insulin, and then your pathways begin. So a low carb diet was good for those who had high blood sugar and high insulin, that's pre-diabetes or diabetes. And overall, your low carb diet seemed to bring down your blood pressure. Low fat, yes, you got some weight loss with low fat diets. Now, interestingly, with low fat diets, we know that there's just more calories per gram of fat than there is for carbohydrates and protein. And for lipids, generally speaking, with low-fat diets, yep, total cholesterol came down, the LDL came down, but so did the high-density lipoprotein, which is one of our healthy lipoproteins. Overall, low-fat diets didn't really have effect on your insulin or your glucose, and it had a small impact on your blood pressure only. Now, what about high-protein diets? Well, high-protein diets, a bit of weak evidence for weight loss. We found that in some of the diets, the LDL, the unhealthy low-density lipoprotein, goes up. There was no strong effect with actual high-protein diets on your blood sugar management, and there's no effect on blood pressure. And then if we look at low glycemic index diets, so we had a small weight loss with low glycemic diets, and we did find that total cholesterol and low-density lipoproteins went down a bit, which is interesting because low GI really goes hand in hand with low carbohydrate. However, what we found with low carbohydrate meals, that people were excluding low GI fruit and veggies. So I think that's the factor between those two differences. And what about vegetarians? Well, a weak link with weight loss. You did have a decrease in your low-density lipoproteins, and your HbA1c came down, and blood pressure came down. But again, lots of this was pretty weak. And then there really wasn't much by the way of evidence in and around paleo and intermittent fasting. The intermittent fasting was interesting because it was pretty similar to continuous caloric restriction. So I think intermittent fasting works for those people who just find it hard to manage how much they're eating. But if they're able to restrict for periods of time without a rebound binge, then actually intermittent fasting might work for you. And that's where this, I suppose, comes round to. It's not about necessarily one diet had been shown to be amazing. They haven't. Certain ways of eating have been shown to be beneficial. Again, plant-based, Mediterranean, the DASH diets. They've been found to be beneficial for health parameters, but none of them really have been good if you institute it as a diet. Ways of living, ways of eating for life have been shown to be beneficial. But when you insert something into your life, if you insert one of these diets into your life as a short-term measure, the evidence is rubbish. And that's what we're getting to. What we need is to look at ways of living and ways of eating that actually are yours for life. So going on a next fad diet isn't going to work, but you might be trying out something that you can maintain for life. And that's what we need to be looking at. And that's where all of the diet industry has, thrived in giving you short-term calorie-restricted meal plans, short-term calorie-restricted food supplements, and giving you plans that aren't sustainable for life. You'll have a bit of weight loss, you'll have a little bit of success, but if it's not for life, you'll find that you've both plateaued and regain. And often that's where the cycle of dieting and weight loss and weight gain really thrives. And it's really quite heartbreaking. And I see patients lots in this space who have developed real diet trauma. So to take apart these publications to date, what we're showing is that really in 81% of the research covered, there was low or critically low quality. There was real variability in the diet definition. What was low carb? Some for low carb, it ranged from 10% carbohydrate in your diet to 45% carbohydrate. So there wasn't a real strength there. And many of the meta-analyses themselves failed to adjust for bias and heterogeneity. So there were small studies inconsistent durations, and really poorly defined diet controls. It's really hard to control the human being in a dietary manner. It's really difficult, especially to do it for any length of time. So the real implications of this, look, a balanced dietary pattern like the Mediterranean and DASH diets probably had the most consistent benefits and no reported harms. Extreme or restricted diets did show short-term loss, but with real potential metabolic risks. So whilst you perhaps with your complete ketogenic approach had good short-term weight loss, you had an increase in your LDLs, things like high protein diets, low carb, all of it but inconsistent with the sort of woolly terms. So diet quality and adherence really matter more than specific macronutrient targets. So getting good quality food, adhering to balanced eating patterns without your peaks and troughs seem to make a big difference. And the evidence for these fatty diets are really weak and very overstated. So what I'm suggesting is that you have tried these diets before probably, and they have failed, and they probably failed for a couple of reasons. They were not sustainable. Over a period of time, what you perceived to be low carb changed. What you were doing to implement a high protein diet became unpalatable, and you didn't get the results in a timely manner. And perhaps that's an important part to think and reflect on. Were these diets set up to fail? Were you given information that sounded really promising, but it wasn't sustainable? Did you perhaps give it a good red hot go, get a bit of weight loss, and then return to old eating habits and then regained? Many of my patients want to lose weight, and the weight loss is such a big part of their goal that changing their behavior around food just doesn't give them the result in a timely manner. So it gets frustrating. If you can't see the rewards, then you can't embrace and maintain momentum. And that's hard to do even if you are getting small gains. So if you are losing a little bit of weight, it's still hard to maintain healthy eating because it is such a huge biopsychosocial issue. It is about your environment. It is about how you were raised. It is about how you interact with people in your family and friends and colleagues. It's about how you use food. Do you use it for boredom? Do you use it for reward? Do you use it to comfort? And do you use it to celebrate? It's about those factors. And then we apply on top of that all rubbish that we are fed by diet industry and the food industry as well. So I want you to give yourself a break from diets. And I want you to start looking at really good quality food, that whole food, plant-based and not vegetarian, as I said, and the evidence tells you that the vegetarian diet on its own is not going to put you towards weight loss dramatically. But a plant-based diet will help, as we saw in the vegetarian diets. It will help with your blood sugar control. It will help with your blood pressure. It will help your lipids. But just being plant-based on its own isn't the same as having whole food. It isn't the same as having food as close to nature. Vegetarians can survive on pizza and pasta. However, that's not the answer. It is looking at good quality food, getting more bang for your buck from every morsel that you eat, and eating with intention. One of the other big factors I find in my work is that most of my patients aren't eating enough. They're not having enough good food. They're having high calorie density food, and they are spiking their insulin, and they're spiking the blood sugar, and they're spiking their fat storing pathways, but they're not actually feeling full, and they're not nourished. They have low iron, they have low zinc, low magnesium, they have low nutritional quality in their food, and they have low fiber. And having low fiber had a massive impact on things like how your gut responds to eating. If you eat something high fiber, it is digested in a different part of your gut, and it's slowly digested. And having high fiber makes you full. But it also means, especially if it's coming from whole food, it means that your gut is working to get that nutrition, which is really good for your gut in terms of staving off risks of bowel cancer. So today was about backing up the evidence of what we're trying to change. And I want you thinking about that the evidence base for all of these diets is pretty poor. And what we want to move towards is an understanding of actual nutrition, so you're getting good quality nutrition from the food that you're eating. We need to talk soon about other adjuncts to how we can help people lose weight for those trying to lose weight. And that's coming up in the next chapter.